Let me just read to you that hopefully you're making your way to John chapter 6. John chapter 6. I'm just going to read a little bit, which is further on from where we're looking, but just to kind of set the scene a little bit. When evening came, verse 16, it says, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. I don't know if you've ever been to a concert or a comedy show or something like that. If you have, maybe it'll be familiar for you, the idea of a warm-up act or a support act. The warm-up act and support act are the comedies of similar style of comedy or bands that are of a similar musical genre to the main act. And the job of this warm-up act or the support act is to get you ready, to set an atmosphere, but to get you set up for when the main act comes, the one you paid all the money to go and see. The anticipation is when the main act come on, you'll be ready and you'll be engaged and you'll be good to go and join in with whatever reaction they're looking to provoke from you with their performance. The Bible isn't that different, really. The Bible's split into the Old Testament and the New Testament. And what we see in the Old Testament, as we trace our way through the different books of those and encounter the different people that God works in and through in the Old Testament, what we see is the Old Testament heroes are in fact designed to be the warm-up or support acts for the main character, the main event, Jesus Christ. Luke in his gospel tells us something interesting that happened after Jesus' death and resurrection. Jesus caught up with a couple of his disciples who were walking to a place called Emmaus, and they didn't recognize Jesus, and so get talking with him about what had happened over the last few days. Then it describes how Jesus asked them a question. He says, "Was it necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter his glory?" So that's a question he asked them. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Jesus understood that all of the things that were in the Old Testament from Moses and through all the prophets were designed to be interpreted through him, his life, his death, and his resurrection. And so that matter of identity and who Jesus is massively important. It was so important. It's so important for you and I, and it was so important for the audience that Jesus gathered round about him in his day to understand who Jesus is, that he is the answer to the Old Testament. He is the terminus point. He is the conclusion. He is the standing ovation, if you like, of the Old Testament. And we've seen some signs of that already in John's Gospel. Early in John's Gospel, the question of identity has already come up with John the Baptist back in John chapter 1, verse 21. If you were with us on that, the Sunday we looked at that section of John's Gospel, and they asked John the Baptist, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I'm not." "Are you the prophet?" He said, "I'm not." And again, today we're going to see this same kind of speculation gathering around about Jesus, about who he is. What Old Testament character does he represent? Is he somebody who's come, or come before? Is he Moses, or is he Elijah or Elisha, or is he the prophet who was promised by Moses? In John 6:14, it describes how the people who were gathered round, who Jesus has just fed, we're going to see a little bit about that in a moment. They've said, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." They understood that they began to believe, they understood him to be the prophet whom Moses had promised back in Deuteronomy. Ingrained in all of that and etched into the understanding of the Jewish people was that someone would come. That it was that everything else up to the point of the Messiah or the prophet, the ones promised by Moses or by the prophets, folks like Isaiah and Jeremiah and those kind of people, all of those things were the warm-up or support act for the one who would come. And so we've just seen, interestingly, we've just seen Jesus engage with that kind of thinking at the end of chapter 5. In verses 46 to 47, if you have your Bibles open and you just want to look at the end of chapter 5, in verses 46 and 47, Jesus says, "For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" It's that in the same way as all the other people were the warm-up in the Old Testament were the warm-up and support act for Jesus, so too was Moses. The law was given to Moses, and that's really why he was celebrated by the Jewish people. The law was given to him by God in such a way as pointed to our need for Jesus. That's what 5:45 says. "Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, on whom you have set your hope." It's that the law was designed to diagnose the sin in our hearts and show that we needed someone to stand in the gap that was created between our sinfulness and God's holiness. What we find here is that as we understand that Moses was the warm-up or support act, was one of the warm-up or support acts for Jesus. He was himself pointing to the coming of a greater authority than him, who we see in John's Gospel as being Jesus, and it is that prophet that we find in Deuteronomy 18:15. "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen." Moses is already telling them, you need to listen to Jesus. And yet they were stubbornly refusing to do that. That's the point of the end of chapter 5. The point being, and this is what John 6 is going to show us more clearly still, that Jesus is better than Moses. In fact, he's better than anything we try to compare or to place in competition with him. Sinclair Ferguson, the Scottish Christian writer, says this in terms of helping us understand this idea of the warm-up support act picture we're hopefully helping you to see in the Old Testament. He adds some legs to all of that. He says this: "Jesus is the true and better Adam who passed the test in the garden and whose obedience is imputed to us. Jesus is the true and better Abel who though innocently slain, has blood that now cries out, not for our condemnation, but for our acquittal. Jesus is the true and better Abraham who answered the call of God to leave all the comfortable and familiar and go out into the void, not knowing where he went to create a new people of God. Jesus is the true and better Isaac, who is not just offered up by his father on the mount, but was truly sacrificed for us. And when God said to Abraham, 'Now I know you love me because you did not withhold your son, your only son whom you love, from me,' now we can look at God taking his son up the mountain and sacrificing him and say, 'Now we know that you love us, God, because you did not withhold your son, your only son, whom you love, from us.' Jesus is a true and better Jacob who wrestled and took the blow of justice we deserve, so we, like Jacob, only receive the wounds of grace to wake us up and discipline us. Jesus is a true and better Joseph who at the right hand of the king forgives those who betrayed him and sold him and uses his new power to save them. Jesus is a true and better Moses. Here we land in Moses. Jesus is a true and better Moses who stands in the gap between the people and the Lord and who mediates a new covenant. Jesus is the real rock of Moses, the real Passover lamb, innocent, perfect, helpless, slain so the angel of death will pass over us. He's the true temple, the true prophet, the true priest, the true king, the true sacrifice, the true lamb, the true light, the true bread. That's who Jesus is. He is better and truer. He is truer and better than anything else you might be tempted to trust your life to. Everything else in your life is a warm-up or support act to him, designed to direct your attention towards him. And that includes all the heroes of the Old Testament that we have. They are designed to direct us towards Jesus, including Moses. So when Jesus says, "You have set your hope in Moses," in chapter 5, verse 45, God designed Moses to help you set your hope on Jesus. Everything in the Old Testament is designed to point us to Jesus, to sharpen our picture of Jesus, and see how God's promises are designed to be kept through Jesus. So the scene is, and so when we turn to chapter 6, we can read verses 1 to 4. "After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand." So the scene is set for us here at the beginning of chapter 6. It's like a game of I spy with my little eye something beginning with Exodus. He goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and we might compare that to crossing to the other side of the Red Sea. There's a large crowd following behind, and we might imagine all Israel following behind Moses as they crossed the Red Sea. It says that the people saw the signs that he was doing, or better, the continual signs he kept on doing. It wasn't just a once or twice, it was an ongoing and often thing that he was doing with these signs and miracles. And again, we might compare that to the signs that Moses did in front of Pharaoh to grab not just Pharaoh's attention, but also the attention of the people that God was on their side and God was calling them to something different and somewhere else. Jesus went up on the mount, and what we see across Exodus is how all the encounters that Moses had with God tended to be up mountains. The law was given, and maybe most significantly, that was where the law was given to Moses, the 10 Commandments. And then finally it says that the Passover was at hand. And the Passover was really designed from Moses' day to be a picture of deliverance and sacrifice. It was really in so many ways the thing that defined the people of God as the people of God. And so what we're going to find in John chapter 6 is all of those things were just a warm-up. John chapter 6 shows us that all those things in Exodus, all those things that Moses did were just the warm-up. Jesus takes and trumps the feeding of the people of Israel in the wilderness and the crossing of the Red Sea and the fulfillment of the law, and everything that Moses offered was just a taste of all the amazing things that Jesus would do. It is that he will always prove to be better. Well, what ways will he prove to be better? Well, I'm so glad you asked. He's better, first of all, better than my broken plans. Better than my broken plans. It tells us, verse 5 tells us that Jesus went up, lifting his eyes up, and then seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" So there's a crowd coming towards him. So we understand he's gone up on a mountain with his disciples, and there's a sense there of wanting to get away with them, away from the crowds, away from the busyness, probably to teach them in some ways. Now, those of you who know me well enough know that I have an aversion to all things hill walking. And I would say the only redeeming feature of hill walking is the snacks. The snacks you get to go, and the snacks you get to eat as you go along, the snacks that Alison brings along to try and keep me in a good mood while we're hill walking. The cruelest part of hill walking, I find, is when the snacks run out. And so Jesus is taking his disciples to hill walking for some time away together to what today would be called the Golan Heights. It's basically the hill country. On the subject of snacks, there's actually two places you need snacks. Hill walking and when you go to see a show. And that's what most folks were involving themselves here. It says they were following him, verse 2, because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. They came for the show and forgot the snacks. Can you picture the scene? Hey, let's get the sandwiches out. Are you ready? I'm ready for some lunch. I could definitely, we're ready. Let's get the sandwiches out. So they open the bag. I thought you were getting the sandwiches. I thought you were making the lunch. No, I asked you to do it while you were watching the television. I did not hear that. Mom, I'm hungry. You can picture the scene, right? You can picture the scene. Eventually, everybody's fighting over the small bag of Haribo found at the bottom of someone's bag. That's really what's happening. So Jesus sees the crowd coming and he anticipates the issue. It's an amazing thing, really. Jesus always anticipates our issues. You know, the people who come, they come with this great idea. Let's go and see the sign. Let's go see the guy who does the miracles. Let's go for the show. Let's go for a walk in the country and go see the guy who's doing the show. But they hadn't thought through the process. They hadn't made their plans were broken. But Jesus sees the crowd and coming in and anticipates the issue. He always anticipates our issues. He's never surprised by the things that matter to us. So even when we are distant, he is diagnosing our need. Even when you're distant, he is diagnosing your need. And it's true for all of us right now. Jesus sees you and he knows you. He knows you're spiritually hungry. He knows that at some point you're going to feel a spiritual lack in your life. He's not surprised that you feel emptiness. Jesus is not caught out by the sense of lack you have, and the fact that you can't put your finger on the solution to it. So the picture for you and me is the same as it is for the crowd in this scene. And until you have Jesus, you're always approaching Jesus with nothing. Until you have Jesus, you're always approaching Jesus with nothing. It's that you bring nothing to Jesus. That's how it works. And we all have this assumption that we have better plans for our lives than we know best what we need. We all think we bring something to the party. Or we heap pressure on ourselves by thinking that we need to prove ourselves or provide for ourselves. We reason that as long as we compare favourably with those around us, that we will make some grade or earn some of God's grace, and we miss the point entirely. It's like we're placing our hope on the things that Moses, the people that Jesus was dealing with, did when they placed their hope in Moses. It was in their own power and in their own provision. And all it did was breed self-righteousness. We reason that as long as we compare favourably with those around us, that we will make some grade or earn some of God's grace, and that's missing the point. Your list of so-called moral accomplishments or material achievements carry the equivalent spiritual benefits of an empty lunchbox. All we can ever prove is the point of Jesus needing to come in the first place. All we really provide is the penalty count that Jesus had to pay the price on a cross for. My sin and your sin makes us an automatic fail on the righteousness scale. All we can earn in our own merit is a mess that leads to eternal lostness. And all of that to miss the point that grace, by its very definition, is not something that is earned but given to you by Jesus. So Jesus invites you to bring your nothing. And he offers to bless you with more than you could ever imagine. In some ways, need and emptiness is useful for the heart diagnosis and the faith assessment that it offers us. It asks us a question: what am I looking to meet my needs? What am I looking towards to fill my emptiness? It's designed to help you to see that you need Jesus, because Jesus is better than my broken plans, and he is also better than my material solutions. So the crowd have come. Jesus anticipates the issue. There's hunger breaking out amongst the people. And Jesus looks around and says, okay, who have we got? We've got, there's Peter, there's James, there's John. Philip, you're from around here. Philip, you'll do it, Philip. Okay, Philip, you're from around here. Tell us, where's the local Aldi? Where are we going to buy some bread? Other supermarkets are available. Where are we going to buy some bread? We're looking for some local knowledge here. And again, we find ourselves in a very Moses type situation. We're going to show you some verses from Numbers chapter 11. Talks about what the people have crossed the Red Sea, they've gone into the wilderness, God has provided for them in amazing ways, giving them manna and quail, guiding them and providing for them. Numbers 11 describes how the rabble that was among them had a strong craving. And the people of Israel also wept again and said, "Oh, that we had meat to eat." Now, I know a lot of you would often share that craving. But listen to what they say next and how ridiculous it is. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt. So let's pause on that for a moment. Egypt, in other words, the place of slavery and brutality that they desperately longed to escape from. And the thing that they wanted to go back was because they thought they could get a good steak there. When they got none of those things, we remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. And Moses complains to God about all of this, and he says, "Where am I to get meat to give to all this people? For they weep before me and say, 'Give us meat that we may eat.'" They were literally crying over onions. Can you believe that? Philip's response serves to highlight the significance of the size of the crowd and the extent of the issue that Jesus has identified. And it tells us that Jesus did this to test Philip. Look what it says. Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this, verse 6, to test him, for he himself knew what he had to do. Here's Philip's answer. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. So it tells us that Jesus has identified the issue. Philip has come up short in terms of his local knowledge, and he's also doing some quick maths. But it tells us that Jesus did this to test Philip. Remember how we said that need and emptiness are a useful heart diagnosis and faith assessment? We might ask, what is Jesus testing? What he really seems to be asking Philip is, where are you up to, Philip? You know, we've spent this time together. And you and I have done that too, as we've spent time in John's Gospel. Maybe these questions are relevant for us too. Where are you up to with Jesus? Where are you up to, Philip? How much do you believe? Where is your faith standing? Is it on me, Jesus is saying, or is it on something else? He's asking, where are you going to? Maybe he's asking, where are you going to run to for the solution to the problem we have right in front of us? We need to understand that Jesus, in compassion, wanted to meet the hunger needs of the people there and to provide some food for them. But what he was most keenly and primarily interested in was the faith of the people and the faith of someone like Philip. And that's what he's testing, is who do you think I am? We're going to come back to that in a couple of weeks' time, because this really is something that bubbles under the surface of John chapter 6. Who do the disciples really believe that Jesus is? So faith is Jesus' key point of interest in Philip and in the people too. So Philip's response is, well, it's a material solution. And Jesus is better than our material solutions. It's too much money. He says it's way too much money. 200 denarii. So one denarii was roughly equivalent to 1 day's wage. So quick maths test at home. I know you've been homeschooling. Let's test how your parents have been doing. Okay, kids, so how many months' wages would 200 denarii be if 1 denarii equals 1 day's wage? Do you have an answer? Pop quiz, what do you do? Okay, around 8 months' wages. That's what we're talking about. Around about 8 months' wages. And Philip says, and even if we did that, even if we spent 200 denarii, you know, they would maybe get a taste of bread. We'd be giving them crumbs. That's about all we would be giving them. It would only be a little bit, only a taste. And Philip reflects a tendency we all have when we're in a bit of a crisis, when we're in a bit of a spot, to turn first to material solutions. How can I throw money at this? How can I succeed in this? How can I come up with a strategy around about this? How can I fix it? And that would be true in how we would respond often to areas where we most struggle. We think that money or success or people are the things that will bring us peace in a particular situation, that will provide us with joy or give us cause for hope. But what Jesus is showing here is that he is better than my material solutions. His readiness for the things that burden you is exactly the same as it was for the building situation we find here in John chapter 6. I love this. Although he said he was testing Philip, he knew himself what he would do. That's what it tells us. He said this to test him, verse 6 says, for he himself knew what he would do. And so if we jump back into what we looked at in Numbers 11 earlier on, again we find Moses' response to the hunger of the people around about him as being a stark contrast to that of Jesus. Where Jesus knew himself what he was going to do, Moses is tearing his hair out and saying, I'm not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. He's saying, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Philip and Moses are so like you and I, and the solutions we are prone to look to that aren't Jesus. Neither they, nor you, nor I, nor the non-Jesus things we trust our lives to can carry the weight of our lives alone. The burden of your soul, your eternity, even your peace, your joy, and your hope is way too heavy for the material solutions we usually entrust them to. But Jesus already knows what he would do in your life. Jesus already knows what he would do in your life. And he is able to carry you. He is strong to bear your soul. He is strong to bear your eternity. And he is strong to sustain your peace, your joy, and your hope. He is strong, and he is better, and he is true. At best, our material solutions provide a little or a taste of satisfaction, but they never really fill us up. Jesus knows what he would do in your life and is lasting in comparison to the little promises that our material solutions make. It is surpassing in terms of all the other levels of satisfaction that our material solutions offer. The challenge we have when we come to Jesus is that we may have a tendency, we don't trust him because we project onto him the disappointment of other things we have trusted in our lives with significant things. And the danger becomes that we assume that he will treat us the same as all the other things that have broken our hopes and dashed our dreams. We assume that he will treat us the same as all the other things that have abandoned us when we have placed great trust in them. Yet what we are reminded of in this unfolding picture is that Jesus is not just better than my broken plans or my material solutions. He is also better than my small expectations. But let's look down into this again, into John chapter 6, verse 8. One of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Jesus is better than my small expectations. So Philip's come up short, but a breathless Andrew has come up with a plan himself. He's gone around and he's tried to stage a bit of a whip round. Let's just gather everything together, see if we can have a kind of on the hoof buffet type of thing where we lay it all out, and hopefully enough there's at least something for everybody. Kind of bring a dish type of meal. But the whip round has had disappointing results. 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Andreas Kostenberger relates something of the Barley Loaves review. This is how they would have been viewed. They were low gluten content, less desirable taste, and an indigestibility made it the staple of the poor in Roman times. Yummy. So what it's telling us is this young man was just a poor boy from a poor family. Pickled fish, rubbish bread, just in case you were picturing sushi and sourdough. This is all we could find, but what are they for so many? That's what Andrew asks. This is all we could find, but what are they for so many? Interestingly, just as an aside, I love the fact that one of the things that's here is fish that is on offer. Given that Numbers 11, one of the meat that the people looked for was fish. The meat that Moses was unable to provide was fish, but here Jesus is going to provide fish in abundance. We'll see in a moment. This is all we could find, but what are they for so many? Andrew is the same material solution head on that Philip did, and that we have seen that we often would tend towards. He forgets who he is standing in front of. He's standing in front of Jesus, the one through whom all things that have been made were made. And whether he was conscious of it or not, Andrew is either making a statement, not even Jesus can do something with just this. Or he's asking the question, what can even Jesus do with so little? And right now, that might be how you're looking at your heart and you're looking at your life and thinking, how could Jesus work in me? How could Jesus change me? How could Jesus use me? We might look at our lives and the state of our hearts and the ways we have messed up and how broken we feel. We might look at our insignificance in comparison to Jesus and think to ourselves, nothing can be made of just this. How could Jesus work in or through someone like me? Well, Jesus' response to that would maybe be something like, just watch. Or, as he does here, take a seat for a minute and see what I will do to fill your emptiness. Take a seat. Take a moment. Just watch what I will do to fill your emptiness. Now, the natural thing in this situation would be, yeah, okay, party's over, time to go home, there's no food, sorry, we can't provide it, we'll send you away. That's what Andrew and presumably Philip and probably the other disciples were expecting. It's late, you must be hungry, thanks for coming. Jesus stands up to speak, and that's what they're expecting to come out. And instead of that, he says, have the people sit down. Have the people sit down. And you say, well, we should send them home. Have the people sit down. It tells us here there were lots of grass, which is an interesting little detail to provide us with. It might be something to do with the calendar placing, just to help us understand that it was spring. So therefore, near the Passover, just to remind us of that. Or it was just in the sense of plenty that this story entails. It was just another detail of abundance and plenty that caught John's interest and attention in light of all that was about to unfold. It tells us as well there were not just lots of grass, but more, there were lots of people. It tells us there were around 5,000 men. So I wonder, what was the crowd? What was the crowd? If there were 5,000 men, that's what it tells us. What was the crowding, including women and children? I wonder how many would you guess at home? I looked up some books, a few different books, just to see what the kind of suggestion was. Some people are suggesting there might have been as many as 20,000 people gathered there. 20,000 people. Certainly 5,000 men is a lot of men. And if they're anything like the men that I know, that's a lot of eating capacity within those guys. So Jesus has them sit down, and I love this. I love this. In the midst of all of this, there's a great crowd. There's massive questions about who Jesus was and whether his disciples really believed in him, and Jesus hosts a picnic. He was concerned for their hunger and he met their need. He hosted a picnic. He is the Lord of the banquet, even if it's sitting on grass in some hillside with a bunch of people who were too ill prepared to bring snacks with them. Basically, Jesus hosted a picnic, and next week, if you come back next week, we're going to see the deeper point and greater invitation that he made. He's going to make to these people. But in the meantime, what he does is he gives thanks for the food, as would have been customary, and also because Thanksgiving is important in terms of heart orientation and glory delegation. It's reflecting the relationship and unity that is going on between God the Father and God the Son, working together in what is about to unfold. And then he says, okay, go to work, guys. And the disciples start distributing the fish and the bread. And it says everyone had as much as they wanted. And no, it wasn't just as much as they needed. It was as much as they wanted. It wasn't just they had enough just to take the edge off their hunger. They had all that they wanted, and there was leftovers. My wife's, Alison, my wife, her rule of catering is you should always have stuff left over because that means nobody's had to be polite and not eat till they were filled and they've been able to have all that they wanted. There should always be leftovers, and that's what we find with Jesus. He fulfilled their hunger desire. Remember when we talked about how John calls Jesus' miracles signs and how they always point to something deeper or picture something greater? Jesus is telling us through this amazing act and the generous, bountiful provision that it represents that he wants to do something beyond fulfilling some basic appetite. He wants to do something greater and deeper in all of us, that is to deal with our heart emptiness and our soul dissatisfaction. He wants to meet the small expectations that have formed out of your broken satisfaction with his generous grace and his awesome goodness. So they gathered the fragments and they filled 12 baskets with those bread fragments. And the people's minds are blown. The people's minds are blown. They're saying, this is awesome. We've never seen anything like this. And the identity question rears its head, as we said earlier on. Is he Messiah? Is he Moses? Is he Elijah? Is he the prophet? Their conclusion is that he's a prophet. This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. They understood all of those things in that moment where warm-up and support act for Jesus. And their response was, well, they wanted to make him king. They wanted to make him king. Now, Passover was typically a time of particular nationalistic zeal. They wanted so this was it. This is the time. This is the time. We're going to take back our country. That's what they were thinking. They thought this is a guy who's going to bring not an exodus from Egypt, but a new exodus from Rome. And there were 20,000 people there to help. Now, it may seem strange to us in our present situation as we're sitting in our living room, possibly in our pajamas, and thinking about, well, it would be good to have more significance or more importance or more power than we feel as if we have right now. Now, it may seem strange for us to consider being made a king or leading people out of the tyranny of foreign rule a small expectation. But when we consider it in light of what Jesus really came to do, that's exactly what it is. That's the truth of the matter. Is that Jesus is something better and greater in his plan than being made an earthly king. And it is to do with eternal promises and provision. We understand what to expect from Jesus because we misunderstand what to expect from Jesus so often because we want him to fit in with our broken plans or to endorse our material solutions. We want him to fit in with our broken plans or to endorse our material solutions. And it says here that people tried to take Jesus by force and make him king. So the question that this presents to us is, as we consider our small expectations and how wrong we can often get it, do you really only want Jesus on your own terms? Do you want Jesus to fit in with your ambitions? Or are you ready to surrender to what he is seeking to eternally achieve in you and for you? Are you ready for that? Are you willing to embrace that surrender? So they raise up a 20,000 strong army and try to take him by force. They try to drag him off to make him king. But it says that Jesus took himself off and he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. He went for alone time, and whenever he did that, it was to go and to spend time with his Father. The scene shifts. Jesus is better than my broken plans. He is better than my material solutions. He is better than my small expectations. And finally, Jesus is better than my shallow security. It says here the disciples get in the boat and they set sail across the sea to Capernaum. And I've got a question about that. Do you think the disciples ditched Jesus? Do you think maybe they were disappointed that he stepped away at the moment of revolution? Do you think this was a further expression of their misunderstanding of who Jesus was and reflected a little bit of disgruntlement that he hadn't fit in with what they thought he was going to do? Did they understand who he is? There's for sure still a sense that they are figuring out who he is and what he came to do. But regardless of what was motivated by them leaving Jesus behind, they set sail, and it tells us that the seas became rough because a strong wind was blowing. They were blown off course and battling the elements. Pretty stressful if you know that water. It was a pretty bad spot they'd actually managed to get themselves into. And they were familiar with those waters, and they were very aware of how precarious their surroundings are. They were seasoned fishermen. They knew the sea, and they knew that they might be in trouble. They also understood that their best hope in that moment was to row through it. And it says they rowed about 3 to 4 miles, so they were pretty far out by that point. So there they were in a storm, relying on their own strength or a change in the climate. And that's what shallow security looks like. It's knowing you are secure as long as you don't face something stronger than you are or more stubborn than you are. It's trying to find peace in the hope that this trial might pass soon. But ultimately, the shallow security, which is a security which trusts in our broken plans, material solutions, or our small expectations, that shallow security leaves us with the possibility of being sunk at any moment. enter Jesus. It says they saw Jesus walking on the sea. And again, we just see the command and authority and the power of Jesus. The idea of walking, it's almost, he's out for a stroll on the sea. Now remember, these were seasoned fishermen panicking because they thought their boat might be overwhelmed, and Jesus is out for a walk. The word Peripeteia, which describes it, describes an easy walk, moving about easily. Psalm 77:19 says, your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So again, we see Moses as a signpost to Jesus. Moses and Israel faced by the sea with Pharaoh in Egypt in pursuit and dread in their hearts, how will we escape? God parted the Red Sea. God led his people across the security on the other side of the sea. Here Jesus, the true and better Moses, comes to his disciples, trapped by a storm, hearts increasingly full of dread. The water is not parted for him by God. He is instead walking in the water to show that his power is that of God, and that power allows him to lead people to security on the other side. But not just on the other side of the water, but as a picture of him having the power to lead people like you and people like me to security on the other side of eternity. That is the surpassing security that swamps our shallow security. Now, the disciples' response is not immediately promising. They thought they had seen a ghost, they were frightened when they saw him coming near the boat. And then Jesus says, it is I. Do not be afraid. I'm not a ghost, I'm here to help. The storm was no longer an issue. It doesn't say that it stopped. It does seem that it isn't worth mentioning anymore because Jesus was there. The storm wasn't mentioned because Jesus was there. Because Jesus became their focus. Jesus became the one they'd hoped in. Jesus became their peace. Jesus became their joy. And that's the security that he offers you and he offers me. Immediately, the boat was at the land to which they were going. You see, our security is so often bound up and defined in broken plans, material solutions, and small expectations. But those are the source of shallow security. And that's why you and I struggle so much for hope and peace and joy. Moses points us to Jesus by reminding us that we can't do anything in our own power. He shows us how shallow our security is when we make our lives about our strength and resolve. Jesus, the true and better Moses, is right now coming alongside your boat. He's coming alongside your life, and he's willing to say, he is saying to you, it is I. Do not be afraid. Better than your broken plans, better than your material solutions, better than your small expectations, better than your shallow security. He is truer and better than anything else. Jesus is truer and better than anything else you may be tempted to trust your life to. Would you trust him today? Let me pray for us. Father, we thank you for that amazing picture we have of Jesus, of his abundant generosity, his abundant grace. And Father, as we prayed at the beginning, we ask that you would help us in our moment of admitting that we are resistant and reluctant to surrendering our lives to his will and his way. And Father, we pray that you would cause us to turn again towards him, that we would surrender those things, those broken plans, those material solutions, those small expectations, those shallow securities, and that we would look to him who says, it is I, do not be afraid. And in him we would find hope, and in him we would find joy, and in him we would find peace. Father, we pray that you would help us to trust Jesus more and more. We thank you that he is worthy of that. Help us, we pray, in these things. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.